Welcome, story lovers, to Crimson Vow Stories, where every wound hides a secret and every silence holds a storm. Today's story is not about fairy tale endings. It's about quiet strength, unseen battles, and the kind of rebirth that comes after you've been forgotten and choose never to forget. Before we begin, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling these stories, and your voice matters more than you know. We read every comment, your thoughts, your reflections, your fire. They shape this growing community.
So settle in.
Because this time, the girl they try to silence is the one you'll remember forever. I wasn't born into silence, but the village taught me how to wear it like a second skin. A fishing town, half swallowed by salt and rust, where the men screamed at the sea and the women whispered behind doors that didn't close properly. They said I was cursed because my mother died giving birth to me. They said I'd bring ruin to any house I entered, because my father ran the moment he saw me blink. And so I grew up under my grandmother's roof.
If you could call it that.
The roof leaked. The floor rotted. But her spine never bent. Not for me. Not for God.
She said,
"You'll never be anyone's first choice, so don't dream like you are." I didn't answer. I just scribbled poems into fish wrappers at night when she snored. Words were the only things I could collect that didn't cost money or shame. By 12, I knew how to gut mackerel, skin squid, and sell broken oyster shells for 2 yuan a bag. By 13, I knew how to lie. "Are you in school?" "Yes." "Which one?" "Oh, a special one." They never asked more than that. Not when you wore seaweed in your hair and smelled like yesterday's tide. But I watched the children with real shoes. I watched them buy glossy notebooks from the stationery van that came twice a month. I watched them read books they didn't even like.
And I wanted that.
Not the shoes. Not even the notebooks. Just the right to hate school because I had it, not because I never could. At 15, the smell of my own dream started to rot. It came with a man, a cousin of my father, who suddenly reappeared after a decade of silence. He knocked on the door with 3 teeth and a pig smile. "Time to repay your family debt," he said. "Your daughter will marry my son. Good match. She's not that ugly." I looked up from peeling shrimp, my hands stinging in salt.
Mary?
I didn't even have a school ID, and they were already trading me like firewood. That night I ran. No shoes. No food. Just a plastic folder filled with poems and the memory of how much I hated the sea. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked until the coastline disappeared behind trees. Then came the rain. It didn't fall, it stabbed. And I ended up in a place I didn't know the name of, soaked to the bone, standing in front of a quiet building with flaking paint. A library.
Closed.
But the lights were on inside. The librarian was a woman who looked like grief in a dress. Gray hair and a tight bun. Eyes like she'd once loved someone who never came back. She didn't scream when she saw me. Just opened the door a crack and asked, "Do you want to steal or sleep?" I blinked. Neither. "What then?" "I want to read." That answer saved my life. She let me mop floors and organize damaged books. In exchange, I could read 1 book per day. No questions asked. I read dictionaries and novels, philosophy and folk tales. I read until my eyes bled and the calluses on my feet cracked from standing too long. I read until I could finally write like my words deserved paper, not the back of fish receipts. She never asked about my family, never asked why I flinched when men yelled outside. But one day, she caught me tracing the edge of a university scholarship flyer. "You won't win with forged documents," she said. I swallowed hard. My handwriting is real. My story is real. I don't need a school to tell me I'm smart.
She stared at me for a long time.
Then she handed me a pen. The world doesn't care if you lie. It only cares if you win. So I filled out that application. Name, Jiawen Lin. Age, 16.
School, blank.
Reason for scholarship. Because they told me I was born to serve, and I want to serve stories instead. I mailed it with fingers shaking, then returned to sweeping dust from corners and cataloging books that no one borrowed. 2 months later, A man in a black uniform came to the library. He said, "We'd like to speak to a Elin." The librarian pointed at me, without blinking. "You're being invited to the City Youth Writing Scholarship," he said. "Full tuition, housing, meals. You even get a laptop." My knees gave out, but I smiled, because for the first time in my life, someone wanted me for my mind, not my obedience. That night, I stood on the edge of the sea again, not to curse it,
But to say goodbye.
The wind tugged at my skirt, the same wind that once slapped me awake in a boat with no future. And I whispered, "I'm not coming back. Not as your daughter. Not as your bride. I'll return as an author. You'll read my story before you recognize my face." And just like that, the tide turned. The school wasn't made of marble or gold.
It was gray.
The kind of gray that reminded me of dishwater after the third rinse.
But to me, it was a palace.
Because it had walls that whispered knowledge, not gossip. Because it had doors that opened when you knocked, not ones that slammed in your face if you came without a dowry. Still, the moment I stepped inside, I knew the air smelled different. It wasn't the sea salt I was used to. It was the scent of perfume, fabric softener, and students who had never gone hungry. They placed me in room 2B, third floor, last bed in a 6-person dormitory. My bunkmate wore designer sneakers. She wrinkled her nose when I unpacked a bag made from stitched rice sacks. "What's that smell?" "Books," I said. "Old books. Salt air. Wet dreams." She laughed. But I didn't mind. Mockery was just another form of attention. I was used to being invisible. In class, I sat in the corner, always close to the window, so I could look outside when the numbers started spinning too fast for me to catch. Math was my enemy, history my friend. But words were home. Words didn't judge me for stuttering or trembling. One afternoon, a boy passed me a note.
It read,
"You write like a storm, but your eyes look like you've drowned." I didn't reply. I just folded it in half and tucked it into my book. Because for once, someone saw me, not just my scores. But the school had a rule. You had to rank in the top 200 to keep the scholarship. My first exam put me at 278.
close.
But not enough. I panicked. So I stopped eating more than once a day. Used lunch breaks to memorize English verbs. Woke up at 4 a.m. to copy physics notes from borrowed textbooks. My hands shook from too much caffeine and too little food. When the librarian called to check on me, I lied. "I'm thriving." But I wasn't. I worked part-time at a night cafe on weekends. Clearing tables. Hiding bruises from kitchen accidents. Still writing, in my head, even when my body ached. I sold handwritten poems for 10 yuan apiece to students who wanted love letters. Some of those letters ended in kisses. Others in slaps. But they all paid. At one point, I fell sick.
Badly.
The kind of sick that clung to your lungs and whispered things like, "Maybe failure is easier." But I remembered my grandmother's voice. Not the cruel parts, but the one time she said, "Even broken boats still float when they're stubborn." So I stayed afloat. The midterm scores came in. I held the printout like it might burn me. Then I saw it. Rank 189. Not perfect, but enough. Enough to stay. Enough to prove I was more than someone's backup plan. That night, I took out the old note from the boy who said I looked drowned. I wrote back. Maybe I drowned, but I came back with pearls in my pockets. I didn't give it to him. I kept it for myself. Because sometimes, the audience for your survival story is just you. When the dorm lights went out and the girls curled into soft dreams, I stayed up by the window, pen in hand, and I wrote one sentence again and again. Where I come from is not where I end. Because I was no longer just running. I was building. Silently. Fiercely. On my own terms. You would think that getting into the top 200 would change things. That suddenly people would smile differently, speak softer, nod with respect. They didn't. Recognition is a luxury for the known, not the nameless. And I was still just the girl from the docks. Still peeling boiled eggs in silence. Still stitching together hand-me-down uniforms. still slipping out of class to wash dishes at the noodle shop across the street. But something did shift in me. I stopped apologizing for the hunger in my eyes. Stopped shrinking when I spoke. I started answering questions in class with a voice steadier than before. And once, when a teacher asked us to write a story titled A Life Worth Living, mine made her go quiet. She handed it back without a word, just a red-inked comment. "This isn't fiction, is it?"
No.
It wasn't. It was all mine. The boy who once passed me a note now sat beside me. He started borrowing my pencil, my notes, my time. But not my silence. He asked once, "Why don't you ever complain?" I stared at him. Because I did complain. Just not out loud. My complaints were in the folds of my blanket at 2 a.m. In the way I clutched secondhand books like they were gold. In every skipped meal, every scar I didn't cover. I didn't need words for pain. Pain had already memorized me. When winter came, the water in the dorm pipes froze. The heater broke. Girls wrapped themselves in duvets, whining about dry skin and cold hands. I smiled. Because back home, we shared one blanket among 4 people. We lit fires with broken furniture. And even then, we were told to be grateful. Now I had a whole blanket to myself. That was luxury. My grandmother passed that winter. No letter. No phone call. Just a quiet rumor passed to me by a teacher who had heard it from someone's cousin. I cried once. In the library. Behind the bookshelf labeled classics. Then I dried my face with a page torn from an old notebook. And kept studying. Because she wouldn't have wanted me to go back. She would have wanted me to finish. In spring, the school announced an opportunity. A nationwide writing competition. The winner would receive 5,000 yuan, enough to fund a full semester, and a recommendation to a top media university. I applied. The topic: rewrite the ending. I laughed when I saw it, as if the universe was giving me permission.
So I rewrote mine.
Not with happy cliches or perfect grammar, but with raw truth. I wrote about salt-stained skirts and nights lit by mosquito coils, about girls born invisible, and how they learned to become the story. Weeks passed. Then one morning, I was called to the principal's office. I thought I'd done something wrong, but she handed me an envelope, smiled, and said softly, "Congratulations. You've been chosen." I didn't cry. I just nodded, walked outside, and sat on the bench beneath the dried cherry tree. No one clapped. No one even knew. But for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe. That night, I walked to the ocean. The same one I left behind when I chased something bigger. The waves didn't greet me. They never needed to. But I whispered to them anyway. I did it. And in the hush of the tide, I swear the sea said back, "I know." The acceptance letter came in a cream envelope with gold trim. Not unlike a wedding invitation. Except this time, I was marrying a life I chose for myself. I boarded the train to the capital with one bag, one notebook, and an iron promise to never bow again. The city swallowed me whole. Its skyline towered like ambition. Its streets buzzed with lives louder than mine. But I'd grown used to walking with silence as my shield. And in silence, I observed, absorbed, adapted. My classmates wore brands I couldn't pronounce. They drank coffee like it was water. They typed on the newest devices, while I borrowed used ones from the corner of the library. And still, I ranked top 5 in every subject. Because I didn't need luxury. I needed liberation. And that, I was earning. When the lecturer asked, "What is the most powerful tool a writer has?" They said language, emotion, imagination. I said, survival. They laughed. Until they read my screenplay. It was raw, ugly, unapologetic. About a girl who was traded like livestock, but rewrote her fate with a pen made from her own bones. The room went quiet. Then the professor said, "You don't just write stories. You bleed them." I sold that script 6 months later. It aired at midnight on a lesser-known channel. No one in the dorm cared. But a woman from a village in the south messaged me. She wrote, My daughter watched it. She finally believes she can leave. That message meant more than any award. I never went back to the village. Not in the way they expected. No fanfare. No ceremony. Just a quiet visit to grandmother's grave. I laid my first printed book beside her tombstone. The cover read, "Rewrite the ending," by someone no one believed in. Now, I teach girls like me. On weekends, I run writing workshops in small towns. We sit on floors with cheap paper and borrowed pens. I tell them, you don't have to be chosen. You just have to choose yourself.
And one day,
When they're asked to write about a life worth living, they won't hesitate. I wasn't born a heroine. I was born a footnote. But I refused to stay one. I clawed my way out of the margins, stitched myself into the spine of my own story. And no one clapped when I rose. But I rose anyway.